So, we've started up a basic vocal pedagogy course, and I've been asked to take the helm. There's two basic things we need from here on out: students and books. If you provide the former, I'll provide the latter. Now, you guys aren't looking to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, not in this economy, so I'm here to give you the best bang for your buck. I've found that the diagnosis and correction of vocal faults written by James C. McKinney is the best possible solution to our problems. And, in just 12 short slides, I'll convince you why. So, let's dive in, shall we? Chapter 1 starts out strong, with a great argument for systematically rooting out problems that students may be having. As soon as a student walks in, you can start diagnosing the student. The book gives great ideas on what to look for, from how they walk to how they talk. It then moves on to what questions would be good to ask the students, and then just what to listen for when they sing for you. It moves on to how to classify these vocal faults into categories such as musical faults, physical faults, and vocal machination faults. Then the book dives into how to set up plans of action, looking for what is wrong, what is causing it, and how to fix it, giving you ways to notice the faults. Chapter 2 opens up by describing how sounds work with scientific definitions to help visualizing how sound is best utilized. To help aiding in the description of musical tone, the book gives concrete definitions of certain terms. The chapter describes how the voice has similarities with other instruments, but it could be dangerous to use these similarities as the voice is just as, if not more so, complex as other instruments. It gives a very neat explanation on how sound is produced from a person. It also gives a classification of sounds we produce, from vowels to consonants, and the semantics of it all. Chapter 3 is all about posture and why we should make good use of it. It very cleanly describes just what posture does. It gives ways to help kids begin to welcome good posture, from having them stretch into it to reinforcing its benefits in their minds. It then goes on to give an amazingly detailed description of good posture. It even mentions what to do with your knees, something I have never heard another choir director mention. Chapter 4 pops up with a vivid description of breathing and how it works. It goes heavily into just what the diaphragm is and how to use it. Moving on from the how, it heads into why a breath from singing is different from breathing of everyday life, touching on spots like how to raise the soft palate and the suspension of breath to controlling exhales and proper breath support. After its apt descriptions, it says which faults to keep an eye out for and how to fix them. Chapter 5 starts with what the larynx is and how it works, giving facts on how it relates to sound, its frameworks and muscles, and even gives labeled illustrations to help understand. The larynx is hard to understand, but the book gives the most accepted theories on how it works, then gives characteristics of a good sound and how to listen for it. It heavily stresses the different phases of singing, like the attack, sustention, and release phases. After that, it gives a heavily detailed list of certain phonetation faults and just how to fix them. After Chapter 5 ends and leaves you wanting more, Chapter 6 comes in and brings up the confusion around the word register. Then, it goes on to give us a good, solid definition to help bring the confusion down, and while it's at it, it throws a great distinction between chest and head voice right into our laps. It goes and gives great descriptions of different registers such as vocal fry, modal register, falsetto, and the whistle register, and the general area of where each of them lie within the voice. It moves on from there to tell the differences between each one and how they differ in tone, such as the vocal fry having more of a growly tone, while the modal register, in which some people consider the normal register, which the book also brings up many people find not true, has more of a general tone of singing, while falsetto's a little bit higher and more breathy, and the whistle tone, as its name implies, sounds more like a whistle. Chapter 7 is all about the classification of the voice. Voice classification is extremely important, and this chapter heavily leans on why it can be dangerous. It also goes into reasons why there is so much confusion from the definition and difference between the tessitura and range. It gives reasons why there can be so much confusion within the terms of things like tessitura and range. You see, tessitura is more of a where they're comfortable singing, and range is the conglomerate of it all. And this book gives beautiful definitions to each, hopefully minimizing the amount of confusion between the two. The chapter gives some great reasons why rushing classifications will end up doing more harm than good to your young singers. Since young voices end up changing, telling a baritone that he's a tenor will make him end up singing in an uncomfortable range. And since he's young, he might not know that that's not how it's supposed to feel, and he won't know to tell you. This chapter gives some great ways to work around classifying your young students too early and damaging their voice. Chapter 8 jumps out of the woodwork and talks about resonators, how they work, and the factors that will affect them. The chapter starts out by being broad on the topic in general. Chapter 8 starts out talking about them in a very broad and general scope, talking about the different ways that air will be built up behind a resonator and then forced through to create the resonation. After being broad on them in general, they narrow the focus down to just vocal resonators. In order to do this, they give some detailed descriptions of each one vocal performers have and just how they work. They break the descriptions of the resonators down into small, bite-sized pieces, giving apt descriptions of things like the chest, the tracheal tree, the larynx, the spharynx, the oral cavity, the nasal cavity, and the sinuses. They go into great detail on each one so that the reader for sure knows exactly what each one is and just how it works. From there, they go into adjusting the resonators, such as changing the position of the larynx, making your throat more open, and raising the position of the soft palate to get more of an oral space. They heavily go into the faults related to resonation, touching on things such as hearing when a singer's too nasally and how to fix that type of thing, how to hear and diagnose and correct when someone's tone color is off from what you want to hear. Chapter 9 comes in and says exactly what articulation is, between how vowels and consonants work, and some of the common phonemes. And if you're like me and have never heard of a phoneme before, it's basically if two sounds cannot be interchanged without changing the meaning of a word. Phonemes can be a tough thing to diagnose, especially when somebody is singing in a foreign language. This chapter stresses pretty heavily that being able to diagnose and correct a phoneme is a pretty great asset for a singer to have. It moves on to telling us how to establish good articulation through the manipulation of your lips, lower jaw, and your tongue. It touches on how to say vowels and consonants, and how to control vowels when changing pitch. When holding a vowel and changing pitch, it can be pretty easy to go into a diphthong. And diphthongs being something you don't want in music, the book goes into how to fix that type of thing and how to stay on your track with the vowel. This chapter also stresses pretty heavily that establishing good articulatory habits is something that a singer should often do. It can be tough to remember that you have to say things a certain way, especially when singing in another language. The chapter gives some pretty good tips on how to keep up. It then moves on to giving you descriptions of faults related to articulation, things such as hypofunctional use of the lips, jaw, or tongue, and it goes on to give you ways to fix that type of thing in singers. Chapter 10 mentions the differences between singing and speaking, bringing up a study that shows that singing is slower and louder than normal speech, but many teachers will say that a good speaking voice will lead to a good singing voice. To do that, one of the ways the book mentions is locating the optimal pitch level for speech. It goes on to mention the easiest way to find the best speaking voice for that person, a speaking voice that's in the range that's comfortable for them. Much like many of the other chapters, this chapter ends on finding many common speaking faults and gives great ways to fix them. The 11th and the final chapter is coordination of the voice, giving lists of exercises on how to develop a voice and how energy relates heavily to being able to extend a singer's range. A major point of singing is being able to line up your voice, and this chapter masterfully tells how, detailing lining up vowels and consonants and giving one of the most fascinating bits on lining up registers that I've ever read. Finally, the book ends on helping to detail how a good vibrato should sound, and it gives a list of common vibrato faults and ideas on how to fix them. Now, just when you think that this book couldn't have anything left to offer, it gives you audition checklists and phonetic symbols for you to use in class. This book is truly a one-stop shop for developing a voice and does so with simple but detailed definitions that students will be able to understand. I cannot stress enough that I fully believe this is the best book for us to use in this class. Thank you.